Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first UNSW Canberra Public Service Research Group, or UNSW PSRG, event for 2022. My name is Associate Professor Sharon O'Neill, and this is also my first PSRG event as the incoming Director of the PSRG Research Group. Taking over from Professor Helen Dickinson, who is now on a well-deserved sabbatical. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from which we join you today, who are the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay respects to the elders of other lands on which you are all situated. And if we can recognise those in a chat, you're more than welcome to do that. For those not familiar with the PSRG, I'll just say a very quick word. We're located in the School of Business. Focus is on implementation of public policy with our four main themes of capability, complex systems, ethics and inclusion. And we research in a number of areas such as disability services, public service implementation, project and program management, public service institutions, government and management, and of course, gender and flexible work. And the program that we're bringing you today is from our latest research project with led by our wonderful Associate Professor Sue Williamson, who you'll meet a little later on. But to get started, I'd like to kick off by introducing our first speaker, Dr. David Snitkin. David has had a varied career as an Army officer, management consultant and public servant. He has practical experience as a workforce change agent in delivering large-scale organisational change. He also has expertise in leadership development, organisational development, workforce planning and analytics. Currently, David is a partner in Synergy's creative people practice based in Canberra. David works with government clients, focusing on behaviour change through effective messaging and organisational design. He writes and speaks regularly about work, organisational change, HR metrics and innovation, drawing on his experience in leadership and management. And it's my pleasure to welcome David as our first speaker for this session.
So unmute first, always good first step. Thank you for that, Sharon, and welcome to you all. My job today is to give you, I think, an overview of what's happened over the past 2 or 3 years, to give you a sense of where we're at and what I think that might mean. Now, I'm hoping that you can see the screen that I've put in front of you. A nod would be good from the people that I can see. Thank you. So what we see, I think, over the last couple of years have been hybrid work's come to us in waves of disruption. One of the interesting things from my perspective is that we've been talking about flexible work, like many others, for a number of years. It was a very difficult conversation to have. People didn't have the mechanics of how to make it work, the mindset to make it work. What the pandemic has done has melted pretty much every opposition to flexible and hybrid working along the way. There are no longer any barriers to that. So what I see and what we've experienced, I think, is waves of disruption. And when we think about waves of disruption, I think we need to be very clear about what that actually means in terms of people's experience in terms of the work I do. Now, the slide should have changed. A nod would be good here. I can't see, that's the problem. So in 2019, work was a place you went to. Everything was familiar. You know, I turned up and things were there. In 2021, work was not a location anymore. It was, you know, the way our work had changed, the things had changed, and it was more open. There were more possibilities available. And in large part, many people didn't want to go back. They'd experienced something that was quite different and wasn't really on the radar at that time. My question to us during the course of the conversation today is, what's it going to be like in 2022? What's the thing going to be like in 2022? Because it may not be similar. It will be an extension of our experience from the last couple of years. It won't necessarily be the same. New possibilities are still open to us, new ways of doing things are still open to us, and we need to be able to see those opportunities. So my question to you is, it's not necessarily closing down on or embedding on what we already have today. It's about what the possibility is for 2022. There is no doubt in my mind that a strategic window opened of a sort that has not been open in my working life. So the context of work changed remarkably. There was a strategic window for change that people wanted to leap through, but needed to work out how and to what end. And at the same time, coping with a pandemic, which was more than work. The opportunity was in a work sense, was to pave the way to high performance, collective performance for the organisation, but also for individuals. I think we've seen people adjusting and adapting to work very quickly in a different way, and opening up new possibilities and new ways of doing things, and people engaging with and thinking about what work is far more than maybe they would have in 2019 when we were off to a location. The task for us all, I think, is what do we take forward? What have we learned from the last couple of years that we can take forward, build on, in order to improve the experience of work, our experience of work, the way we work individually, the way we work collectively, the way we come together in that organisation. I think one of the great travesties of this period is that if we don't learn from it, if we don't take from it and move it forward, we just regress back to what we know. And I feel the opportunity to regress back is diminishing every day, but there is always the possibility that we'll carry forward old habits and just repackage them into new things. One of the interesting things for me along the way when I talk to organisations, individuals, leaders about the experience of hybrid work is that it's come out of we're in a shared predicament, if you like. What I say to organisations, to people, employees, is that the impact of the pandemic work and workplace isn't what you think it is. So your experience is not somebody else's experience. We need to be much more open to thinking about what the shared predicament was, but in often cases they were isolated experiences. I experienced it in my way and I responded to it in my way. And collectively we are finding our way to a shared and common understanding. And so that idea that it's been a collective experience, it's been a collective predicament, but our responses, individual responses to it have been very, very individual in lots of ways. So it brings me to the idea of waves of disruption. We had normal, and then we had adjustment to a crisis. So if you go back to 2020, we responded to a crisis, and there was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of motivation, a lot of, let's get in and get this done together. And I think both leaders and managers and employees in the organisation adapted tremendously well to that environment, and very, very quickly in the public service. There was a real speed of movement in lots of places very quickly in those early parts. So, and if you think about it, that a lot of what organisations are designed to do is to adjust and adapt to a crisis. So that early part was filled with innovation, opportunity. Yep, people made mistakes. Yes, it was frustrating, but we got through that, and there was a real shared sense of collective endeavour, if you like. But again, isolated experiences for many people. Over time, this became the new normal, as it was called. We adjusted and adapted over time. What we noticed in that period was that people started to develop the habits of remote working, of hybrid working, and of those sorts of, they developed the skills. Managers started to repackage and readjust work. The workforce was coming back with, these are the ideas that I have about how my work was going forward. So the conversation shifted to a more collective interchange about what this might look like in a longer term frame, and the process for that came through. Then there was this mix of arrangements. So now I can go to work, and then I can work from home, and I'm not quite sure what to do with those two things, and I'm not quite sure how to balance that out. I'm not quite sure how to make that happen. We had calls for you must be at work at 3 days a week. We had individuals saying, well, I'm not going back to the office at all. We had organisations responding with different policy responses as they felt their way forward on this, both in the private sector and in the public service, finding their way forward to a new set of policy arrangements that started to try and find the balance between office location and work. Much of this coming back to, again, a shared conversation, a shared dialogue at the working level about how this might work, but built on the fact that we're through a crisis and now we have habits and practices in place that allows us to actually have this conversation. So in terms of disruption, we've adapted our behaviour constantly over time with each new pattern. And in each phase, both employees and managers and organisations have responded differently to each phase. I think now we are very much moving into new patterns of work and new patterns and behaviours built on all the experience that we've accumulated over time. What does that look like as we go forward? And it may, a lot of the calls for, what my perception is, a lot of the calls for the, you must be in the office 3 days a week have diminished from what they were. And a lot of the, I'm going to stay home and I need to work from home all the time is also diminished. So we're starting to find that middle ground of how do we negotiate and navigate what's best in terms of individual contribution and collective performance. And that's, I think, going to be the big conversation over the coming 12 months as we move into this, as the pandemic potentially reduces in our lives in terms of the impact that it's had. These conversations about work and about how we fit together and how we produce are going to continue. They are going to continue forward, but without that driver of the pandemic behind. So what does that next wave of disruption look like? How do we carry that forward? And I think that's a big part of the conversation that I think that the research is about, but also about the conversation that you might want to have. There were a tremendous number of myths that bubbled up during this time. It was an enormous number of myths. Employee performance and productivity declines when you're working remotely. I think, my view is that is untrue. In fact, it opened up from the work that we have done with particularly APS agencies, opportunities for a broader number of voices to be heard, for people to engage in different ways than they would when they were in the office. And I think that those opportunities have been part of the story of productivity. My own view is that we really need to rethink what productivity is. Now, I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's an open question for us at the moment, a more complete understanding of productivity. Employee mental health is negatively impacted when working remotely. I think this one is a tricky one. I think there are definitely impacts from working remotely in the way that we have been. I think for the researchers in the organisation who are thinking about this, as well as for the people living and breathing it, sometimes when we talk about the mental health impacts of remote working, it's very hard to separate those out from the mental health impacts of the pandemic. There's a lot more nuance in this and a lot more work that needs to be done about this particular myth along the way. And my own view is that there are certainly for some people that working remotely is not a good option. For others, it is. We just need to be very careful about what is the driver of the mental health impact. And I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done in that area to help us tease that apart. But again, this is an experience that people are going through and they have their own views, and I think they're very valid. The physical presence in the office is necessary to build a workplace culture. It was interesting early on, and particularly when people were talking about coming back to work, for set periods, that one of the arguments was that, you had to be physically present to create a culture. I've worked with teams remotely for many, many years without a pandemic, and people who've never met each other have built a culture of work and a way of practice and understanding of each other remotely. It's been a thing for a long time. Yes, there is real value in people coming together, and I personally think that that's a big part of the nature of work, but is it the only driver of culture? I do love the observation that it's a water cooler conversation. I can't remember the last time I saw a water cooler in an office place, so I'm not quite sure how that works. But anyway, the interest for me here is that this is one of the things that we have to work at and we have to think about. Culture is a driver of performance. We want the right cultures and behaviours in place. If the context of work has changed, what is it that we collectively need to do to build that and to make that, bring that culture forward? So very high level snapshot, if you like, of how my own experience of this in working with our clients and APS clients particularly, my own experience of this on the way through. I do think that we need to think about this in terms of waves of activity, waves of disruption, and we are just in another wave. But in every wave of disruption, we carry forward the learning that we've had from the past, of our past experience, but we need to put that learning in context and challenge it as we go. And I think that's a big part of these sorts of meetings and the research that Sue and the UNSW folk have conducted. That's pretty much it from me. And I'm sure we'll have questions and the like as we go. So Sharon, back to you while I work out where the appropriate button is gone.
Tasha, are you through? Okay. Everyone can hear me. Thank you very much for that, David. That was fantastic and provided a wonderful background for us and what's been happening. I think that whole issue about the individual and shared experience and how that builds into our perceptions of what is possible and where we're going is very interesting. And Sue will give us a bit more of an of insight into what those experiences are now. Our second speaker, Associate Professor Sue Williamson from the Public Service Research Group here at UNSW Canberra. Associate Professor Sue Williamson specialises in public sector human resources and industrial relations, focusing on workplace gender equality. Her recent research includes examining how public sector employees worked from home during the pandemic in 2020. Sue has also researched the future of work with a focus on flexible working and how middle managers can progress gender equality, identifying barriers and offering solutions on ways forward. Sue has published extensively on these topics, both in academic and non-academic media, and we welcome Sue to the stage.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here and I'm thrilled that we have so many people here. We've got almost 500 participants online, which I think has to be a record for PSRG. So it's fantastic and I welcome you all. Okay, let me share my screen. Here we go. Okay, so here is our beautiful new report. And let me just get rid of this here. Working during the pandemic, the future of work is hybrid, written by myself and Professor Linda Colley from CQ University. This report is now available, which is terribly exciting. So we wanted to know who was working from home throughout 2021, how work was being conducted, and what the impact was on employees and managers. We conducted a survey in 2020 which looked at these sorts of issues, and then we wanted to replicate it in 2021 to see what findings held, what was new, and we also wanted to have an increased focus on workplace health and safety, as well as issues around employee retention. So we partnered with the Community and Public Sector Union to undertake this survey, and Linda and I would like to send a huge thanks to the CPSU for their work on this project. We surveyed over 5,000 APS employees. We had a good spread of employees, about 30% were managers or supervisors, and a quarter were not union members. So it's a fairly good spread. We conducted the survey during lockdown in September, October last year. Moving on to what we're all here for, here's our key findings. One of our biggest findings was that there's a mismatch between employee preferences and what they actually do. So outside of lockdowns, half of the respondents spent all their hours in their usual workplace, in their employer's workplace. However, fewer than 5% worked from home for 3 days a week, but over 20% would like to do this. So people want to work from home 3 days a week. They also want to work from home for 2 days a week, and just over 17% of respondents said they'd like to work from home 40% of the time. That's 2 days a week for full-time employees. Interestingly, over a third of employees said that they would like to work from home all the time or for 80% of their working week. So there is a big chunk of employees who don't want to spend much time in their usual workplace at all. And so, David, your comment about the polarisation of agencies saying you have to be in for a certain number of time and employees saying they want to spend all their time at home waning is really interesting, because our findings show that it's quite entrenched. So that's something we can talk about. So this shows us that employees have a clear preference to work hybridly for 2 or 3 days a week. And we know that fewer than 10% of respondents want to spend all their time at their employer's premises. We also uncovered a slight gender imbalance in who works from home. So slightly more men than women were working from home throughout our survey period. Well, this is outside of lockdown. So more men were working from home. And this is very interesting because emerging research shows that more men want to go into the office and women prefer to work from home. When we conducted the survey, I think this is probably due to women making up greater numbers of frontline staff. And so they're in the office. And so that's why I think more women in the office, more men are working from home. Going forward, if more men want to go back into the office and women want to stay at home, this could be detrimental to gender equality because of proximity bias. And proximity bias is where a manager gives staff they can see the best pieces of work, the pieces of work that lead to career development and promotion opportunities. And it happens all the time with part-time workers who are mostly women. So there is a danger going forward that proximity bias could be bad for gender equality. And that's something that we also need to keep an eye on. We asked respondents whether they had requested to work their preferred working arrangements. The preferred working arrangements could be in the office or their usual workplace, or it could be at home. And we found that over 25% of managers had approved the request in full. So that's great. Managers are approving people's preferred working arrangements. Interestingly, we also found that 16% of employees hadn't asked for other reasons. Reasons for not asking include the operational requirements of the agency, such as being face-to-face, customer-facing, agency policies, resistance from managers, the imposition of caps, which I'll talk about a little later, and also personal preference. And then finally, for this slide, almost 14% of employees said that their arrangement was approved, but they didn't ask for their preferred arrangement because they didn't think it would be approved. And this suggests to us that employees perceive there is still a level of resistance in their organisations, either from their manager or the senior management, that they won't get what they're asking for. And this question related to working from home. People were telling us they wanted to work from home, but they hadn't asked. And so a lot of it is due to resistance. Moving on to productivity, following up from what David has said, employees have considered their productivity is higher working from home. So almost 3 in 5 respondents considered their productivity was higher, and fewer than 1 in 10 believed that their productivity was lower. And this held for last year's findings as well. So it holds across classifications as well, apart from graduates who need a bit more supervision, and apart from SES officers who are well used to working from home, and they said that their productivity was about the same. If we have a look at productivity in our survey in 2020 compared with 2021, we can see some interesting changes. So in 2020, over half of the managers and supervisors said their team's productivity was about the same as pre-pandemic. Last year, 2/3 of managers said their productivity was about the same. So more managers are saying teams' productivity is about the same. In 2020, 1/3 of managers said it was higher. This has decreased to be 1/4 of managers. So what's going on here? We think this is a phenomenon known as panic productivity, where the pandemic hit and APS employees were extremely productive because there was that sense of crisis when COVID first hit. And so people were really, really productive. And then that's not sustainable. And so over time, people's productivity has leveled out. So the takeaway from this is that productivity, at the very least, is being maintained. Employees may also have considered that they were more productive due to working longer hours. So here we see that just over 1/3 of respondents indicated that they continued to work their usual number of hours while working from home, so that's great. However, 1/3 of respondents said they worked more hours, and this is an increase on our previous survey in 2020. So people are working longer hours. Not all, but about 1/3 are working longer hours. We also see slightly more women than men working longer hours. So we're starting to build up a picture here that more women than men are in the office and women are working slightly longer hours. We know that longer hours can lead to burnout, and a sizable minority of managers detail concerns about lockdown fatigue, mental exhaustion, and burnout. We asked respondents whether they had experienced any psychological workplace injuries due to working from home. The vast majority, over 90%, said they hadn't. However, the few that had said that they had experienced isolation, loneliness, and stress, and COVID fatigue. We also asked managers about their team's experiences of working from home and workplace health and safety. Over 700 managers gave us written comments about the WHS impacts on their staff, and half of these comments detailed negative impacts. So we are seeing some negativities associated with working from home. Managers told us that their teams were struggling with isolation, which is leading to decreased motivation. And they also said, however, that it was related to COVID fatigue, that it may not be working from home per se that is leading to burnout, but the exhaustion associated with COVID fatigue, as this quote here says. This person says their staff's motivation and energy seems less, but that may be more due to COVID restrictions than working from home. So we can speculate that burnout may ease once COVID fatigue ends. Is it going to end? We know that burnout, there's always burnout, but it may ease once people can work from home and we're not in a COVID situation. We know that hybrid working is becoming a key retention factor. We asked respondents if their agency did not allow them to work from home at all, would they consider changing agencies or leaving the public sector? And 45%, almost half, said that they would consider changing agencies. So that's a really important factor as agencies think about their employee value proposition. And I know that they're thinking about this at the moment, how to embed flexible working and hybrid working, but this is going to remain an important factor. However, hybrid working may be impeded through the use of caps. So we asked respondents whether their agency had placed a cap on the amount of time that employees can work from home. Almost half of the respondents stated that their agency had, and the most common cap was 40%, or 2 days a week. So as this manager was saying, They prefer to support their staff. They don't mind about caps as long as operational requirements are met and they're not able to support their agency's policy. So caps are interesting and more discussion needs to be had about this. Research is coming out showing that it's not the best to let employees determine how many days they can work at home because it can lead to proximity bias. On the other hand, caps can impinge on managerial prerogative. So here we're seeing tensions between employee choice, managerial prerogative, and agency policy to determine the optimal amount of time to work from home. And this is a conversation within agencies that will continue as we go forward. So in conclusion, we can see that there is a mismatch between employee preferences and working arrangements. Hybrid working is a very important retention factor. Employee wellbeing is increasingly important and employees need adequate support, and workplace health and safety is becoming much more talked about and is really important. And workloads, hours and expectations of productivity require ongoing monitoring and adjustment as required. So if you're interested in this research, if you would like to talk to me about it, if your agency would like to have a look at research in your agency, you can email me. The report is now online. It's available on the Public Service Research Group website. Look for publications and you'll find it there. And thank you, everyone. I hope that this research will assist agencies and employees as we all continue to navigate this, changeable and uncertain world at the moment. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Sue. That was fantastic. And I do encourage everybody to have a look at the report. There is a link to it in the chat. So make sure you download a copy of the report and have a look at the PSIG website as well. That was a great plug there. Okay, our final speaker, I'd like to invite Melissa Donnelly to speak next. And Melissa is the CPSU's youngest ever National Secretary, as well as the third woman and the first working mother to hold the role. Melissa was admitted to practice law in New South Wales in 2006 and has degrees in social science and law from Macquarie University. Soon after joining the CPSU, Melissa represented APS staff and argued for their rights to participate in the Your Rights at Work campaign. Melissa led the CPSU's National Political, Industrial, Research and Legal team, as well as its Justice, Revenue and Media team, and has represented staff in the Australian Taxation Office, Australian Bureau of Statistics, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Courts and Tribunals, Australia Post and Telstra. So nice varied expertise there. More recently, she was responsible for the union's biggest stronghold in the Australian Public Service, the Department of Human Resources. I'll invite you to present to us now, Melissa.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Sharon. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to Elders past, present and emerging. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Thanks for this opportunity and thanks to Sue and Linda for their amazing work in this space. It's a really important issue for the CPSU moving forward and a really significant issue for many of our members. Hopefully you can see the screen now. It's popping out for me. Yes, sorry about that, just jumped out for me for a second. Before I talk about the research and what it means for the CPSU members, I'd also like to acknowledge that many CPSU members throughout the pandemic had to attend work. Sue's already alluded to that. Lots of frontline workers in particular had to turn up every day. So this doesn't reflect everyone's experience, but was a critical issue and a critical control measure during the pandemic for so many members and their families and the community to keep people safe. What this research shows on the back of the really significant research that Sue and Linda undertook last year is that the world's changed, and both David and Sue have already spoken spoken about this issue. For the public sector, COVID-19 really dispelled so many myths about working from home and about what's possible. And the APS and APS employees delivered under enormous pressure and amazing services to the Australian people and the Australian community through COVID-19, with so many thousands and thousands of employees working from home. So it's clear that the pandemic's really changed how we should be thinking about working from home arrangements, and undoubtedly how employees are thinking about working from home. Overwhelmingly, employees want a mix of home and office-based work, with 74% saying that's their preference. And that is, from the union's perspective, what we are now seeking in negotiations with agencies and the government to achieve a more permissive, a more flexible approach to these questions. It, of course, as well offers benefits both to employees and employers. Sue spoke about the productivity findings of this research, but what it really shows, this research, is that productivity has been at least maintained, or in some cases improved. Both employees have that perception, around 90% of employees saying their productivity was the same or higher, and around 92% of supervisors agreeing that productivity was the same or higher. In terms of supervisors' attitudes, which I think is a really interesting point that's borne out in this research, 72% of staff said their supervisors support them working flexibly, and 70% of supervisors say that as a result of the pandemic, that they're more supportive of staff working from home. So the shift at an employee to supervisor relationship level has already really occurred. It does require, and I know there's been some questions in the chat about skill set for managing with remote working arrangements in place, and that's an important issue. And agencies and employers more broadly need to proactively support supervisors to develop their skill set to do this. And we've seen some of that, but there's definitely more that needs to be undertaken. And 92% of supervisors said that they were as productive or more while staff are working from home. What we are seeing at an APS level is an opening of a gap in terms of how supervisors are approaching these questions and what their direct experience managing their staff and viewing employees' productivity, and sometimes what we see from agencies' approach. So while 72% of employees through this research say their supervisor was supportive, their direct supervisor, it's only 57% of employees who think their agency is supportive of these arrangements. I think for APS agencies and for the questions of recruitment and retention and the ability to attract and retain staff that are required, that's actually a significant issue and a significant gap that needs to be addressed. In terms of what it means in terms of employees' conditions, it really now means employees need to keep up. Sue spoke about the high number of employees who would consider leaving their agency if the public sector, if there wasn't the option around flexibility around working from home. Even for people who they weren't, there was also a significant cohort in that question who were unsure. Very few people didn't think it was relevant to their considerations about staying or leaving their agency or the public service.
Mel, can I just jump in? It's Sue here. Your slides aren't changing, so you might need to stop and share them again. Sorry for the interruption.
Sorry about that. That's okay. Sorry, everyone.
And they are so beautiful that people need to see each one. There we go. Are
we up to that? And
yes.
Please keep up. Thank you, Sue. Thank you for letting me know. So there is a very strong view from employees. It's borne out in the research, it's borne out in conversations we have with our members and APS employees, that there is an expectation around working from home into the future, and people will eventually be voting with their feet if they don't have those expectations met by agencies and employers. One of the interesting things I think borne out by this research is it's not just the employees who say that. Supervisors also clearly indicated that they thought working from home and an appropriate flexible approach to working from home was important in attracting and retaining staff. 82% of supervisors saying that they thought it would help attract and retain staff. And in the tightening labour market that we currently have, that we can read about every day in the paper in various industries, but right across the country, we know there's a tightening labour market. The ability to be competitive on these issues on working from home is actually really important. There are private sector organisations that have already moved in this space, and if the public sector is slow, this will be an issue on recruitment and retention, and even as between APS agencies. In a labour market like Canberra, where there is a significant APS workforce, people will make decisions based on what they think the arrangements will be in a different APS agency. In terms of what we've been doing, and hopefully my slide changed that time. So we have since 2020 been taking action on this issue of working from home. Obviously, at its inception, it was a workplace health and safety issue, and it still is a workplace health and safety issue in many jurisdictions today. But beyond the COVID pandemic and on those workplace health and safety issues, it is really clear. This research confirms it, but we see it in everything we deal with our members and delegates as well. It's really clear that there are changing expectations and people want to see that reflected in their arrangements. So we, since 2020, we've been working with agencies on long-term arrangements that we would like to see across the public sector. The union developed a model policy and has taken that to APS agencies for discussions as part of a coordinated push for a more permissive approach around these flexible work arrangements. The wonderful research that Sue and Linda have undertaken has, really provided the data point for that, and as David alluded to, assisted us in dispelling myths that may otherwise be being put forward as a barrier to widespread working from home arrangements. We've also advocated centrally with the APSC and the government and the minister about the need for an improved APS approach on these matters, and built support in the workplace. Through delegate and HSR networks, discussions with members and employees. This has been a really critical issue over the last couple of years that people have engaged on, and employees really want to see a better outcome. And finally, as we do all that, we have been tracking agency approaches, just as the union has in previous years done that on APS pay tables and what you get paid as an APS 6 in different agencies. People now want to know what working from home rights you can get across different APS agencies, and that really that action or that engagement from our members really backs in the finding of this research that up to 40% of people would consider changing APS agencies. And so we've produced scorecards across APS agencies that are available on the CPSU website. As we look ahead as well, what our members and what lots of employees want to see as brought out by this research is a clearer approach with a rights-based approach to flexibility in the workplace. 74% want the hybrid working arrangements in the future. 87% think it's a standard working condition that employees expect, and 90% of those respondents also said that they believe that should be in an enterprise agreement. From our perspective, having these rights in enterprise agreements deals with, makes it clear, makes it enforceable, but also makes it clearly accessible to all staff. People know where they stand and know the process to go through to seek working from home rights, and have clear expectations about how that will be delivered. Unfortunately, the current government's approach on bargaining is a barrier for the APS agencies to address these matters properly. The current government's bargaining policy has a no enhancements principle, which means if the APSC determined providing working from home rights was an enhancement, then agencies would not be allowed to move on this issue. And you can see how that bargaining approach from the government is going to come up against the clear expectations of employees in a tightening labour market and cause a range of issues. In the APS, there are a number of large agencies that will look to bargaining processes toward the end of this year, and this will be a clear agenda item for our members and our union as we go about that. In the meantime, there's a whole range of other measures we would like to see agencies undertake, providing more staff, more support rather, to supervisors of staff who are undertaking that remotely, removing the caps on the number of days. Sue has spoken about that as a particular issue borne out by this research, and taking a more proactive approach to workplace health and safety. On things like supervisory responsibilities and workplace health and safety, the issue is not for agencies or employers to say it's too hard. The issue is for them to think differently and proactively about how they can meet those expectations and also manage those issues moving forward. So we have a lot of research as well and information about what we're doing on this on our website. And if you are on the APS or the ACT Public Service or NT Public Service and participated in this as a CPSU member, thank you very much. But also, if you're interested, visit our website for more info too. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mel. That's fantastic. Thank you to our three speakers. That's been a fantastic presentation. I'd particularly like to thank Dr. David Schmidtken for starting out by providing that crucial context that set the scene for us and gave us some background about how we got to where we are. And then Associate Professor Sue Williamson, who's followed up by sharing the findings of the research about what's actually been happening in the last 2 years. And then Melissa Donnelly coming through telling us not only the wonderful work that's happening within the CPSU, but also the intentions for moving forward and where that's going. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. And if you would like to unmute your microphones and thank our speakers, you're most welcome to do that. Please do feel free to keep an eye out on the PSRG website for future events.